So thank you very much for joining our Beyond Granting event today, from Intractable to Traction. Just a few housekeeping items off the top. We're here for an hour. We've posted a slide with some instructions. To turn on your closed captioning, click the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There will be a chance to ask questions, so please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. We are monitoring this, and we will try to get to as many as possible towards the latter part of the session. My name is Salima Rawji, and I'm on the board of the Toronto Foundation. I'm the chair of our Social Impact Investment Committee and your host for this webinar. I'm also a fund holder. Thank you again for joining us for this Beyond Granting session, one of the events in Toronto Foundation's annual Learning Exchange program for fund holders and the wider community. Many of you know the importance that grants and donations play in supporting community and affecting change. This event is about exploring the evolving responsible investing and social finance landscape as a key financial approach to drive impact that goes beyond granting or making donations. Let's start by acknowledging the land that we're on. Toronto Foundation has been on a reconciliation journey for a number of years, making it a priority to address long-standing gaps in funding and to be intentional about continuous learning, as well as building relationships with Indigenous residents, leaders, and organizations. This is also extended to our social impact investment pool, where Toronto Foundation has made 3 investments in 3 separate Raven Capital Indigenous funds, totaling $2 million. Raven is the world's first Indigenous-led and owned impact investment intermediary that addresses the equity gap for Indigenous entrepreneurs and with investments in enterprises across Turtle Island, or what is also known as North America. I am situated in a place where Indigenous people have lived for millennia. And as a guest on these lands, I acknowledge that I am on the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. Today, the meeting place of Takaranto is still the home to at least 70,000 diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island. We are also governed by Treaty 13, known as the Toronto Purchase, that was established between the Crown and the Mississaugas more than 200 years ago. I am grateful to be in this place and to have the opportunity to work, live, connect, and learn with so many of you today. We also want to acknowledge that there is another land-based conflict that is top of mind for so many in our city. There has been devastating and traumatic loss of life in Israel and Gaza. And the suffering continues for Israelis and Palestinians and all those personally connected. As a team, we have spoken about this, grappled with what we should or shouldn't say or do. We still don't have a good answer yet, but continue to chart our way. Right now, it is important to hold space for those personally and deeply affected by the ongoing conflict, and who have been forced to carry on with their lives and jobs when this war is all they can think about. Let's also acknowledge that it isn't just only the global conflict that hits close to home or affects this global conflict that hits close to home or affects Torontonian, even if it doesn't make the news. So why are we here today? 7 years ago, Toronto Foundation began a journey of learning and change to shift our focus and put equity at the center of our work. And while there has been an evolution in our research and our granting and our learning program, we wanted to create impact in all that we do, including through the assets we manage in both the main investment pool, currently 28% in our socially responsible investment products, with a goal to reach 70% by 2031, and in our $12 million social impact investment pool. And in fact, we have fund holders who have directed their funds to this social impact investment pool. With the social impact investment pool, we fund areas aligned to the Toronto vital signs research. Two of these areas are those that are getting a lot of attention because they seem to be two of the most persistently wicked problems that our city and countless other communities are facing. They are affordable housing and the environment. So for this year's Beyond Granting session, we wanted to do a deeper dive on these seemingly intractable issues of housing and the environment and talk to people working in these two areas to see what traction is being made through responsible investing and what's on the horizon. I personally am super excited about the conversation. I come professionally from the real estate space and work in housing. And so I'm excited to learn from my colleagues here that are advancing the work on a daily basis. To help us all learn more, we are so pleased to have brought together three speakers for our discussion who are steeped in this work: Andrea Nemtin, Chandra Ramadurai, and John Cook. Our discussion will take about 35 minutes, and this will be followed by the opportunity to answer a few questions from the audience, and then a quick wrap-up. So let me introduce our panelists. Andrea Nemtin has led complex organizations and initiatives focused on creating positive social and environmental progress through strategic philanthropy, media, and arts, social innovation, and impact investing. She is the CEO of Social Innovation Canada. Chandra Ramadurai has over 2 decades of experience in sustainable energy, construction, and banking in North America, Europe, the Middle East, and India. He is the co-founder and CEO of Efficiency Capital. John Cook's career in the investment industry began in 1991. He was president of Greenchip Financial Corp, and since it was founded in 2007, and is now the co-lead of the Mackenzie Greenchip team after it became part of Mackenzie Investments in 2021. Thank you all for joining us. And as a reminder to our audience, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to submit a question. So the environment and housing, oh my, huge, irretractable issues, but we have seen some promising outcomes driven by socially responsible investing, social finance, and new ideas. Chandra, can you take a minute or less than a minute and walk us through what Efficiency Capital does?
As usual, I started talking without doing the unmute. So first and foremost, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chandra. I run Efficiency Capital, and we describe ourselves as an energy as a service company. I know you may be wondering what an energy as a service company does, but what we are a company that goes and develops and upgrades buildings, especially the energy and the net zero infrastructure within the buildings, create savings, and then get paid using the savings pool we create. And I'm going to give you a quick example of how it would work. Let's say you're living in a condominium or a cooperative, and your building is spending, say, $500,000 in utility cost. I'm using a slightly large number than most cooperatives would spend, but this is for example. And we know that this $500,000 in utility cost, which includes water, gas, and electricity, can be reduced to, say, $350,000. But to save the $150,000 a year, the building has to invest $1 million. Most building owners, especially cooperatives and condos, don't have reserve funds or don't have the ability to invest. So this is where we step in. We go and invest the $1 million, and then we guarantee the outcome. We tell them that we will achieve the $150,000, and you pay us only when we achieve this outcome. And from the $150,000 we say we'll take a fee of $100,000. And this $100,000 is how we get paid back the $1 million. We take it back for 10, 15 years, however long it takes for us to recoup. So that in a nutshell is what we do. In terms of our experience, we have done this since 2013. We are an offshoot of the Atmospheric Fund, TAF, as many of you may know. And we have retrofitted over 62 buildings till date. By the end of the year, we expect it to be over 70.
Well, And what would people be surprised to know about your work?
I think one of the common themes we hear in the market is that to do good, especially environmental good and social good, you have to compromise on financial returns. And one of the things we have set out to prove is to debunk this theory. As you know, Salima, you are Toronto Foundation has invested in us. We offer financial returns to all our investors. We give market-linked financial returns as much as possible, depending upon people's risk appetite and other things. But the bigger outcome is the fact that we do much beyond that. We are a triple bottom line company. We focus on people, planet, and profits. And when I say the planet, I'm talking about reducing GHG emissions. In many of the retrofits we do, we achieve significant reductions. Currently, we're working on 2 projects, one with 87, another is 88% GHG reductions from baseline. Early next year, we will be doing 100% completely net zero retrofit.
Wow.
We're very proud of that when it will be completed. But I think the untold story is the social outcomes.
Yes.
Most people don't realize how much of social good we could be doing. In one of the buildings, which was done using our approach, pre and post surveys told us that there has been a 57% reduction in absenteeism at work, 38% reduction in doctor visits, 31% reduction in heat and water complaints. Okay, this is something this is what gets me up every day in the morning.
Yes, for sure. I mean, we can think about your work when you explain it and really understand very clearly the environmental impact, but the social impact is quite moving. And thank you so much for sharing that. Can I ask just one quick tiny follow-up, and then we'll move on to I want to hear so much from our other panelists as well. The net zero building that you're about to take on, are you anticipating the same type of financial return, same type of financial investment, so your model looks the same, or is that more costly to implement?
No, it isn't. Again, it depends upon the outcomes, right? This particular building is actually a 2018 building, which is very rare. We never retrofit these early young buildings. Most of the buildings we typically retrofit are in the 60s and 70s buildings. And one of the biggest advantages of that is we are able to take out all the old boilers, convert it into electricity, add heat pumps. So effectively, not only are we upgrading it to a fuel which is not polluting, we are also adding cooling and comfort factors. And that's a huge, huge thing. And that particular comfort factor change is what drives the economic value. I'm not talking purely from an energy savings perspective, but from a market perspective. Okay. People need to spend a little bit more on something which gives them both cooling and heating. Right. And I think that's what drives the whole value.
Yeah, particularly in the world today. John, your focus is on investing in the environmental economy, but through the public market. Again, in 1 minute or less, can you explain how your work has been tackling this issue?
Sure. So we started actually back in 2005 investing in private businesses. And Chandra, what you just said would have been super interesting to us back then. It's still interesting to me. But Greg Payne, the co-founder of Greenchip, happens to be an economist. And back in about 2006, early 2007, he calculated what sort of capital would be necessary to get to net zero, and came up with about $2.5 trillion a year of capital globally. And the number is probably higher than that now, even though surprisingly we get more bang for the buck. But at the time, there was about 800 billion a year being invested globally. And we just believed that our skills were better suited to trying to create a track record that could pull large pools of capital into our space. And so we invest in both the obvious place like renewable energy and the developers who integrate renewable energy, but all the energy efficiency opportunities like what Chandra was talking about. So we tend to invest in the types of companies that would produce the equipment that Chandra would be buying in his businesses. Mm-hmm. And there are so many businesses that actually need capital. And I would say, what the impact is of a public strategy is maybe not as obvious to everybody, but the reality is we live in a world that is consumed with pouring more and more money into the Microsofts and Apples of the world. And large investors do everything they can to avoid capital-intensive businesses, which means that providing leadership to to investors, and actually proving that you can make money at this is the way that we can close that gap. And so just to summarize, we're now, 15, 16 years later, up to about 1.7 trillion a year. But as I said earlier, the 2.5 is not enough. We probably need 4 to 5 trillion a year. So our work continues. We've got to get more capital moving to these solutions.
Want to ask you a question about the changing landscape in our public markets and our interest rate environment. But before that, in terms of the return profile that you see with this strategy, can you just touch on that for a second and then maybe talk about why things are tricky or not tricky in the world today?
Yeah, I hate talking about returns because our returns have been good. They've been very good. This year is more difficult, but over the 15 years, the returns have been excellent. But I don't like talking about returns because investing is a very unsmooth process. So somebody who invests today is going to have a very different return outcome than somebody who invests a year from now.
Maybe I can ask it in a different way versus not an absolute, but like in the public market relative to say where Chandra might be finding his investors in the private market, is there a conscious reason to go in the public market rather than private equity?
Well, I guess theoretically, you should get a liquidity premium investing in Chandra's business versus the liquidity benefit that you get. You should get a lower rate of return investing in public markets. I'm pretty used to making the case why it sometimes goes the other way around. But let's just say both can provide excellent rates of return, and both are absolutely essential to getting us where we need to go.
Yeah, we need all participation.
That's the political answer.
There we go. Well, I like that one. That makes a lot of sense, and why you're here today as well. And so, can you talk about what's changed? What has this last few years brought that makes life different?
Okay, like keeping it really short, I think there are 3 themes that are really affecting our space, or let's call it capital intensive investing. The first is higher for longer interest rates. This interest rate cycle started first quarter 2022. In capital intensive businesses, when you're building big infrastructure, higher interest rates adds a lot to the cost of those projects. The second one is deglobalization. The equipment that Chandra would be buying is put together with all sorts of bits and pieces that come from all around the world. And as we deglobalize, and unfortunately, I think this trend is going to continue, it is making it more difficult. And the final one is actually something that I would embrace. There's some growing skepticism for some clean technologies that maybe aren't as economically possible as originally was envisioned. And I actually think that's a good thing because it's going to mean more capital going to the right places rather than just jumping on the hype of some of the technologies that are unlikely to work.
So it's like we're winners and losers are emerging as we try and iterate through new ideas, which is
there's always winners and losers in business, but I think it's becoming more clear what the solutions need to be.
Okay, that's great. And Andrea, you have spent years working to catalyze change at Social Innovation including at Social Innovation Canada. With 1 minute in mind, can you tell people why Social Innovation Canada emerged on the scene?
Yeah, thank you. So Social Innovation Canada is really working to create systems change on national social environmental challenges. And we actually emerged from SIG, Social Innovation Generation, that was at Mars. And we came out of that when SIG was closing. We sort of took on all of their IP and create became pan-Canadian initiative. So we sort of have collaborators from across the country, Vancouver all the way to the East Coast, Quebec, in the prairies, and in Ontario. And in 2022, we became a national charity. So what we do is we sort of do 3 things. We support the ecosystem social innovators, connecting them to each other, resources and opportunities. We have an innovation practice which we lead, which is we work with place and identity-based communities to address systemic or complex issues. And these processes are designed to be inclusive, collaborative, cross-sectoral, and create experiences of those, incorporate the experiences of those acutely impacted in order to generate powerful interventions. And the third thing we do is systems transformation. And so we work to reduce systemic barriers and unlock resources to enable the implementation and scaling of solutions. So currently we're working on a number of areas. One, we do some work on climate change. We're doing a climate equity lab. We're doing some work on community wealth and sustainability in the arts. We have partners working on settlement issues, food security, and of course, housing and housing affordability has been a big topic for us.
Can you take another minute and just talk to us about that role that you're playing in the housing ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks. So we're sort of trying to do all three of those things on housing. So one of them is just to make sure that the folks that are in our network working on housing are connected to each other, and we can have them sort of convene them and have them share their ideas and be that connective tissue between folks on the ground who are creating solutions. Then we have our innovation practice. And so this started in 2020 with a lab on the financialization of housing. And so social innovation has a lab approach that we do. It's really a multi-sectoral approach to understanding the system around a problem, and then understanding the levers to address it, and starting to support the creation and or identification of solutions. And so we started with financialization to really understand sort of what John's talking about in terms of how the global markets were impacting housing affordability on the ground. And that was not super straightforward. From that, we incubated and supported a number of different prototypes that are happening across the country in communities. And then we transitioned to a specific lab in Hamilton on transit-oriented affordable housing, which we're currently engaged in. In terms of the systems work, we're also participating in things like next week I'm presenting to the House of Commons on purpose-built rentals. We moderated a panel at the Sustainable Finance Forum. So we also work at the policy and the markets level and the cultural level to try and impact the system and work in collaboration and deep collaboration with others on that.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. To say that our goal there is to really work with folks in philanthropy and purpose, market and sort of the purpose-built businesses in communities and policy to really, and academia even, to try and shift us to a 20% non-market housing reality.
You guys have a very clear objective of adding the non-market component into this housing.
Yeah. It's not a change we can do alone, though.
No, absolutely. And I don't think anybody in this conversation actually can do any of this alone, which is, I think, an important insight. Thank you for raising that. Now that we have a better idea of what each of you do, let's try to understand what maybe some of the issues that have held back traction in the spaces that you're in. Let's try to keep our answers tight so we can get through this conversation. But maybe we'll start with you, John. What has been holding us back in your space?
Yeah, I think it's getting to a point actually where it's much better. So this is more of a to talk about what held us back, I think would be instructive to those that are listening, because Greenchip was a very small company when it was started, and the whole financial system globally, but I'll just talk about our country, was so stacked against any type of small enterprise, investment enterprise getting going. One of the stories that I like to say is we actually we were built on community foundations, private foundations in Canada, and often wealthy families that were associated with those. And I always told them your biggest impact was getting us to the point where we could talk to the Mackenzies of the world and then to the Ontario teachers and CPPs. And now we spend lots of time talking to institutions beyond Canada. But going back to how challenging it was, I remember the day we got the CEO of one of Canada's biggest banks. I won't mention who it was, but he agreed to put $1 million into our fund. He had to sign with his own bank a letter saying that it was clear he understood that he could lose all his money investing with us. And that same bank, the lawyers at that bank I was used to dealing with in a previous business, they said, absolutely, there is no way we will put your fund up for sale in our bank because we don't want small enterprises on our shelves. So
Wow.
my important message, I think, to all those that would be on the call is the real impact often is just scaling businesses like the three of us run to get to a point where we can actually get to larger pools of capital.
Yeah, that's an amazing anecdote there. Wow. And maybe Chandra, what about you and your business? What was difficult? What is holding you back today? Or maybe what was difficult to get you to the place that you are at?
Hearing John resonates so well with what we do. What he started in 2007, we started a few years later, but we have been going through the same journey. But for us, it's also about making the change happen. I mean, change management, everyone says change management is the most difficult thing to do. And imagine trying to do this in a space where people have been doing the same thing for the last 100+ years. Building owners, real estate owners are used to owning the building and everything in the building. So when we go to a building and say that, oh, we are this new age company, we are going to come and own all your toilets and your lights and your boilers, the first reaction is, what the hell are you talking about? Then the next reaction is, okay, I want to hear you more, humor me more. So we go and tell them our model, and then they say, oh, this is too good to be true. What's the catch? And you do all that.
We might have had that conversation in investment discussions.
And then you overcome all of this. And the next question here is that, okay, I know your model probably would work, but how do I know it would work in my building? What if in the morning I get up and I can't have a shower because you're owning the shower heads, right? And so the trust piece, the final piece is the trust. So what we have overcome over the last many years is the fact that our model works. And now, as people have started seeing across the landscape that we are not going anywhere, we started making partnerships. To have those local partnerships in place is very important. Obviously, Toronto, we are blessed because of TAF, because of you, and so on. And so McConnell Foundation has invested in us. But now, last year, in the last 6 months, we have made partnerships in Nova Scotia with Efficiency One, which is the utility there. We have made partnerships with the Greater Montreal Climate Fund for Quebec and Montreal Focus. We have made partnerships with the Alberta Eco Trust. We are doing business in Saskatchewan. We are doing business in Ottawa and a bunch of places. So, and that to us is the one which has changed over the last 7-8 years, I should say.
Can I just ask? Maybe I can ask Andrea to answer the question, and then I want to come back to John and Chandra just to clarify one follow-up on both your points about scale and trust. But Andrea, what about you? What has been difficult? What is difficult today? What has been difficult to get to where you're at?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think there's two pieces. One is where we're at in terms of Social Innovation Canada and an organization working to try and impact systems change. And that has, and then it's the challenges around the specific thematic areas and these are very much interrelated tensions. So systems change is kind of hard to fund because it takes a long time. You're trying to address challenges like with housing. It took us 40 years to get here. And it's a very interconnected system. There's no one solution, there's many solutions. And it's impacted. There's so many different levers and so many different shifts that all have to happen. And so actually coordinating and sequencing those changes so that the solutions, which are generally already there, right? So we see great solutions in communities, in place and identity-based communities, because they need the solutions. And so they have to find workarounds. But they get stuck. It's hard to, I remember trying to get my board to invest in Greenchip, and we had pledged impact investing, but they're like, oh, you're public markets. That's not impact. We can't do it. I remember that time, honestly, came 3 times. I'm like, ugh. So it's hard to have people do something different. And we have a 3 horizons model that we talk about around, work when you're doing the same rules, same system, and you've got the solution kind of despite it all. And then you can shift the rules a little bit. I think we're starting to see that happening with housing and with investing. And then you can actually shift the system. Right.
Yeah, like how do you get over that first hump though? Like how do you convince, maybe this is transitioning to things that work, and it was a little bit of what I wanted to ask Chandra and John, like maybe I'll put it out to all of you guys and whoever wants to answer is like to get to scale, you need to convince a bunch of people. To earn trust, they have to be willing to enter a relationship. To be able to bring, you know, Andrea, to your notes, like how did you convince that they should be even in the conversation? Maybe we can start with you, Andrea, and then hear from Chandra and John. I'm just gonna fix my light while you talk too, so I'm not trying to be rude, but you guys
Not
can't
at all. Yeah. For me, we've been thinking a lot about something called relational infrastructure. I mean, I know that sounds kind of flaky, but really people need to know each other. They need to be able to see themselves in a system and what their role is and what other folks' roles are. There's a terrible, terrible phenomenon that happens often, especially in the nonprofit sector, where we get an unintended consequences around unintended adversaries, right? Because when we start to not sort of think we start to compete against each other instead of working together. And, you know, actually bringing those people from different perspectives and different realities and different tools together to the table and putting the problem in the middle and saying we each have a piece of solving this, it takes resources. It takes time, it takes energy. Everyone's working desperately, you know, and we're all working on very small budgets. And so that sort of relational infrastructure, that kind of convening and
I think that
hosting.
word that you just used when you were speaking to me, what popped out is it takes relationships. That's what allows people to put resources in. That's what allows people to put time in and money in. And so maybe John and Chandra, is that similar? Is that maybe an answer to one of these hard questions we're trying to ask?
Do you want me to start, Chandra?
Go for it, John.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so the unfairness of this world sometimes is that some of us have social capital and terrific Rolodexes. When we start these businesses, there's no way Greenchip could have made it without the Rolodex that we had when we started our business. You know, Greg and I both had credible careers already. And so unfortunately, one of the real challenges is that we start these endeavors sometimes with a different set of cards. I felt like we had a pretty stacked set of cards, and it was still so incredibly difficult. And so, but the one lesson I would say is go to where you don't try and convince people that don't believe in climate change that there actually is climate change. Go to where people are open and actually want to be part of the solution. Bring them your take on the solution, which in our case was capital capital that could be levered many times over by bigger pieces of capital or pools of capital, and then keep them along for the ride, because almost every one of those early investors we have are still with us, and they're the best advocates. The question I always ask them, like, I'll mention another community foundation, Hamilton Community Foundation, Terry Cook and Annette, their CFO, you know, they were always there if we needed a referral. They would stand up in front of people, like, bring the people along with you because they want to help. And everyone that you get helps you with the next one.
That's so well said about social capital, and so important to the work that Toronto Foundation has done and the research that they've done. And so that's a plug for Toronto Foundation too. But Chandra, you know, how will it work in my building? I want control. Like, how did you convince the first? Who was the first? How did that journey go? And then what lesson did you learn to carry to the second, third, fourth?
Yeah, I think it's about, I agree with you. Unlike John and Andrea, like, you know, I didn't have a lot of the social capital when I started. I'm an immigrant to the country. I came to Canada with hardly any relationships in place. So for me this is partly also about grit, but it's also about a lot of the people who we partner with. So in terms of going to the specific question, Salima, about where we started, I think our job was eased a bit, because this program the investment program we run was started by TAF, the Atmospheric Fund, back in 2012. That was the first building which was ever retrofitted. They basically went to some city-owned buildings, some social housings, YMCAs, tested this out.
Yes.
And they basically saw that this works. And once it worked, they realized that as an organization which was focused only in Toronto and didn't have a lot of the mandate to scale this, they said, okay, we need to set up a private entity which will have the ability to not only take capital from us, but from multiple people. And the biggest challenge in this problem in this is the fact, I mean, I think that we talked about billions and trillions of numbers. The challenge here is this: every building which you go on retrofit on an average needs approximately $1 million.
Yeah.
The people who write the checks want to write 50 million, 100 million minimum. They don't want to write small checks. How do you make the $1 million guy talk to the $50 million person? Unless it's through the real estate mortgage, which no one wants to use because they want to use it for other purposes. So this is where we came in. The fact that there was a body of work and then we continued the good work. Touchwood, we have never had one situation where we have run into problems, but we always solved it. And that's what is good about us. The word of mouth that John was talking about, someone steady, ready to stand and vouch for you, that helps a lot in scaling up. I mean, to such an extent, this year we are looking to double our portfolio. What we did over the last 5 years, we'll be doubling in this month and next month. And next year, we are looking to double and triple that. So that's the speed with which we are starting to journey at this point in time.
So you kind of hit on the next question I wanted to ask, which is what does the future look like? But maybe I'll just say to the audience, we're ready for your questions. So please do send them in if you have any. We'll continue the conversation with the things that interest you. But in addition to scale of number of buildings that you hit, Chandra, what else? Like what do you hope your work looks like in 5 years or in the next decade? What do you hope to have imitators? Like, what is it that is the bigger goal?
Yeah, I think that I think that I want to give a preamble before I get to the 5 million, the 5 year hence conversation. And the preamble is the fact that whenever we talk about affordability housing, the whole conversation is very focused on new builds. We rarely ever talk of existing buildings.
The new supplies or
the new supply, the market, right? So the problem is that 80% of the buildings which is going to exist in 2050, our net zero target date, already has been built, which means that all of these buildings have to go through a retrofit.
So just so that the audience stays with us here, that we have a global objective of a 2050 net zero target, and that's not about the new buildings coming up. That's actually about the existing assets in place. And so you're focused on that.
Yeah, we are focused on that build, and also to give you the scale of the problem. I think just to replace the energy infrastructure has a life. Your boiler in your home, your lights in your home have a useful life. The same way the energy infrastructures, just to replace the energy infrastructure like for like, we need about $30 billion. To get to net zero targets by 2050, we need $70 to $115 billion, depending on whose numbers you want to believe. So We're talking huge numbers. So when we are talking about us as Efficiency Capital trying to be in this market, our goal is to actually get all the people. We're talking of, even if we are 100 times, 1,000 times bigger, we can never do this alone. Our goal is to get all the mainstream banks, the Mackenzies of the world, the BMOs of the world, the TDs of the world, all of them come to the table and work with us. We want the policymakers to work with us. We want the entire ecosystem working towards so that they recognize energy efficiency as an asset class. And the asset class piece, when I'm talking about, it's like real estate as an asset class. Stocks are an asset class. Renewable energy is an asset class. But energy efficiency, one of the most capital intensive work, is not an asset class today.
Wow, that's interesting.
5 years.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. Ambitious, but call on us, your supporters, I guess.
Thank you. You always be there for us.
Andrea, you spoke about like the idea that a big role that you guys play is making sure that everyone's working around the table together and not against each other. And so maybe you can talk about how that actually looks, what you do, and then what does the future look like for Social Innovation Canada?
Yeah, thank you. I want to just sort of loop back to what we were talking about with the social capital, because I think there's two important pieces there. One is I've always found that you need to be with people that agree, in what you're saying, not with people that they don't necessarily have to agree to the solution, but they have to agree to the problem. You know,
The
and
common
problem
factors, yeah.
definition is actually sort of one of the first stages we go through when we're starting to work on something. Do we all agree that this is a problem? And in housing, one of the big things we did is we really shifted it from thinking about housing to actually people need homes.
Right.
And a home is more than a tiny trailer in a parking lot, or, you know, and actually, and it sort of humanizes it, and it humanizes people around the table in terms of, you know, what do you think around home? And in Hamilton, like, you know, where we're working, they're using homelessness and family in the same sentence. I mean, this is such an interesting problem because it's so acute. I was just writing about it. It's so frustrating. Everybody's ready to change it. The minister wants to change it, the prime minister, every level. And yet there's still people that don't have a warm place to go home at night. And if we keep investing in shelters and not in the overall system, it's going to go on forever, right? It's just going to keep bleeding. So I think that, you know, and when we think about the solutions, you know, what can each of us do something? I think part of it's around honoring everyone's contribution. So sometimes, you know, yeah, I'm so glad to see municipal bonds. You know, the sustainable bonds have a social bond category that municipalities are using to fund housing in the municipalities. And this is really interesting and exciting. And they have to be quasi-government organizations. Toronto's raised $428 million on the public markets through these sustainable bonds. And then there's I think the revolving funds are the way to address housing, and they need it's a capital stack with government and concessionary capital, and then regular investors investing in almost like a private equity type piece with regular returns, and then community bonds, right? So there's so many different levels. I think in 10 years or 5 years, I hope we're not talking about housing. I hope everyone has a house and we're talking about communities. I hope we've moved on. And
I am with you on that. I am definitely with you on that. And John, in your work, what does the future look like? What do you hope the future?
I think to close, it's an excellent question. I think that the biggest challenge right now, and what I hope gets fixed in 5 years, is that pouring more money into Apple and Microsoft can solve, you know, our problems. That's our industry is obsessed right now. I'm talking about, like, institutional investors are obsessed right now with low capital investments. So housing, you know, building efficiency, rebuilding our electricity infrastructure, the infrastructure that allows us to feed 8 billion people, keep those people warm, and move the people and things. It requires investing in molecules, and we're obsessed right now with investing in digital packages. We don't need an iPhone 15, this time in titanium, and, you know, all the data centers and our obsession with AI and so on. I think I would even say our obsession with investing away from traditional fossil fuels and mining, we actually need some of that to get through the transition. And so I think there's sort of a misplaced focus. And in 5 years, what I would love to see is the realization that the better returns, investment returns, are going to come from investing back in the infrastructure that makes our economy actually work.
And so that's a nice transition, actually, of like where people put their dollars. If there are people on this call that are thinking about socially responsible investing or making an impact through their investments, what would you say to them? Like, I think the answer you gave us is sort of in the broad market. Let's stop talking about Microsoft and ChatGPT and Sam Altman and all the things, and let's start thinking about what's actually going to make an impact on people and their day-to-day and the infrastructure that they need to live, breathe, and work in a healthy society. But what about me as an individual? What do I do? What does that action look like?
Look, I think the biggest problem with investors these days, or maybe that's not the right way to phrase it, but I think we have to stop just handing over all our investment decisions to financial advisors and banks and just sort of saying, here's my savings, you go and do with it what you need. We have to start thinking about where our capital is going, our precious savings is going. And I think if you just think about where it really needs to go, and you've got 3 speakers here, but there are so many places that capital clearly needs to go. If we think about that more, I think it will go to different places. And I actually think it will go to places where you'll end up getting better returns. So my advice is just think about where you want to invest any savings that you might have, and you'll end up with better returns.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that. A really great question from the audience has come through, and I'll just read it out to you, and whoever wants to tackle it first, I would love to hear all of your thoughts on this. I'm interested in your thoughts on the distinction between the scale of capital needed and the time it takes to complete projects. One problem we have is the political need for a quick response at the cheapest cost. And I'm so happy, Toby, thank you for raising this, because in my own work, coming previously from municipal government, that was always a tension of like real estate projects, affordable housing projects take time to complete, but there's always the need for the announcement. How do we get over that hurdle? Or what are your thoughts between that distinction between the scale of capital and the time it takes? And we'll start with Andrea.
I think we need to do both, right? So in our work in Hamilton, I just the most frustrating working with YWCA, they need 600,000. But really, we have $1 trillion problem. So I think this is what we're talking about, is what's the shift? Chandra brought up the fact that we need to retrofit existing buildings. We have no acquisition funding for housing in this country. And we need to ensure that the naturally occurring affordable housing is transitioned into non-market housing to be able to achieve affordability. That's, the market is not serving everyone, and we have a large population that can't pay market prices for housing. And we have a huge non-market housing sector, whether it's in assisted living or supportive housing or just co-ops or, folks that are providing for long-term care or student housing. And so the fastest way to move this is to actually invest in the land trusts, in the community bonds, and into the acquisition of existing housing and transitioning it and keeping it in the housing. Stephen Pomeroy did some work that said that I think every new affordable under $750, under $1,000 unit that's been created, 7 to 10 have been lost. So we need to stop the bleeding, right? And then there's so much new clean construction. Like I saw this one organization, Promise Robotics, or all these panels. These are really clean, new building processes that are going to actually be able to change not just our housing, but also our environment. Because the built environment is really bad for our environment right now, the whole way that that's done. So, I think that and then we need to push the government to work with other investors to underwrite revolving funds that institutional capital can flow into. And that's something that's been done across all throughout the United States. Billions of dollars have gone into affordable housing because the investment community worked with government, and the government, instead of paying for everything, they guarantee you put in 10 to 25% of the capital, and it works for the investors and it works for the non-market housing sector.
Can I just ask a question of clarification on this note? And then Chandra and John, if you could think about that idea of, to get to scale, you need proven concept, but proven concept take time. How do maybe you can think about your answer there. And Andrea, just a quick follow-up on this idea of the revolving fund. But we just heard in the last few weeks from the federal government that they're putting more money behind CMHC. Is that not a revolving fund, or what are the issues that you see there relative to what's going on in housing?
Well, the work that we've done looking at models that have existed and thrived outside of Canada, whether it's Denmark or the United States, and all the learning that's been called from that, is that when you're working on a non-market housing sector, it actually needs to be outside of the traditional sector. Because if you think back around that 3 horizons, CMHC, I love the CMHC. They fund our work. I think they're really trying to do the right thing. Their job is insurance and mortgage provision, and their biggest clients are banks and developers. And it's very hard for them to actually implement the strategies of the National Housing Strategy, because dealing with the non-market and affordable housing sector and the challenges of assisted living and the complexity of that actually has to really be done, in community. It needs national money and local decision making. And so it's hard to ask mortgage and insurance provider to work on something and come up with the solutions that are that easy. What I found is to get these things fast, quickly done, we need efficient, affordable, and flexible capital to flow into the non-market housing sector for acquisitions, development, and construction.
Thank you so much for that insight. And I'm just, as you're talking, thinking about, okay, are there other sectors that are examples of that? The way the community foundations work, maybe Toronto Foundation, right? But Chandra, John, what are your thoughts on time versus scale?
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in, John, this time. And I think one of the most underappreciated facts about efficiency and housing improvements is the fact that almost all the work being generated, one, is local, because you need to work inside someone's homes. Number one, it costs a lot to retrofit an efficient home, typically to produce. So as how homes get built, you need to build a lot of energy capacity. And you can either build the energy capacity or you can free up your existing capacity. It costs you approximately 1/3 of cost to free up energy capacity than to build new capacity. Okay, that's the Canadian number and the global number. Okay, and so one of the biggest things which people don't focus on is the fact that there is a bang for the buck aspect. Number two, so you can really achieve scale by retrofitting the 2.5 million, the 15 million residences and the $500,000 commercial and institutional buildings we have in Canada. That is one, it's creating value. And number two, all of these can be done with very fast. I mean, you're talking about on an average 6 months, because we factor in climate related things. You can't go and touch someone's boiler during the winter season and so on and so forth. You're roughly 6-month cycle. So this type of speed and the impact we create under the bang for buck opportunity, that's very rare to find in a lot of the businesses we do. And that's why we want to focus on, and I want to give one statistic here, and the one I think it's very relevant for us. Overall in Ontario, about 3% of the floor space is with affordable housing. But 9% of the energy costs and the GHG emissions are from affordable housing. Okay, and that tells you how badly run they are and how much in need of retrofits and upgrades they are needed. And the problem is getting compounded because by 2033, 1/3 of the social housing contracts with the province and the feds are coming up for renewal. When someone doesn't know if they're going to basically get their money back after 10 years, they don't want to invest in 25-year upgrades.
Yeah.
This is why you need different methodologies to get to scale.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, that stat is so powerful from two perspectives. One, just the energy question that you're talking about, but also that only 3% of floor space is affordable housing, right? That's a pretty shocking.
Very small compared to UK and Sweden and all these places. 8%, 11% numbers there.
Yeah. John, scale versus time.
I'll give a tiny bit of a theoretical argument to how it might get fixed. We've lived through the last decade in this manufactured low interest rate environment. And, when interest rates are zero, it totally plays on the time of investing. The discount rate we use is made it almost impossible to put any real discount on earnings that should come down the road. And you would think that would inspire us all to make really long-term investments, but it actually worked the other way, where everybody became very uncertain about what the future was going to bring. And I actually think that higher interest rates, although it's been difficult in the transition, will bring some discipline back to investing, and the better returns should exist for those investors that think long-term. Coming back to what Chandra just talked about, if you make an investment in efficiency in housing today, the paybacks these days, because the equipment is so good, are just phenomenal. But in this very low interest rate environment, nobody really cared. And so I really think that we're in a better space, even though higher interest rates are challenging people right now, that it is part of the solution.
We'll get to a better place because of it. Well, that's optimism, and that's great, and that's a nice way to maybe end our conversation today. And so before we wrap up, would be interested in folks reflecting on what stood out for them today. Did you have any ahas? If you can share your thoughts in the chat as we just wrap up, I'm sure everyone would love to just hear from each other, which is amazing. I really appreciated the conversation today. There was definitely for me aha moments, even just as recently as the last two comments of the future is brighter with high interest rates. I don't think anyone suffering right now through that would feel that, but that's a great thing to think about, because it maybe gets us as a society to a better place, right? And just the shocking numbers, Chandra, that you unveiled, Andrea, the solutions around how we can create an ecosystem of investing that gets us to the solutions that we need for affordable housing. And so thank you so much for your insights today. You have piqued, I hope, those in the chat to think about maybe some of their philanthropy redirecting into impact investing, maybe some of their investing going into socially responsible investing. And so just once again, appreciate the time and helping us to explore and understand this evolving space that we're in, especially around housing and the environment. So just finally, if you haven't seen the Toronto Foundation's newly launched Vital Signs report on the power of us, there will be a link in the chat. And if you missed the report launch in mid-November, we'll be hosting virtual briefings in January. And so please stay tuned. You'll see a link in your email. And with that, thank you very much.